I'm not afraid of death anymore. My name is Margaret, and I'm 65 years old. I've buried people I loved. I've held hospital bracelets on my wrist like they were seasonal jewelry. I've watched my hands change shape with time. And I've sat through more "we need to talk" conversations than I ever thought a single heart could survive. And I'm going to say something that still surprises me when I hear it out loud. I'm not afraid of death anymore. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm careless, and definitely not because I'm tired of living. I'm not afraid anymore because one night, ordinary, quiet, almost boring, my life cracked down the middle, and through that crack, I saw something I can't unsee. Before you decide what you think about that sentence, before your mind tries to file this into dream, hallucination, old age, wishful thinking, just stay with me. Don't believe me. Don't disbelieve me. Just listen, the way you'd listen to someone confessing a secret they've carried too long. Because the truth is, I used to be afraid of death in a way that embarrassed me. I wasn't afraid in public. In public, I was the woman who brought casseroles, who sent condolence cards with neat handwriting, who said the right things at the right times. I was the one people leaned on because I always seemed strong. I could stand beside a casket without shaking. I could hold a crying friend and keep my own voice steady. But at night, when the house went silent, the fear came like a tide. It wasn't fear of pain. It wasn't fear of judgment. It wasn't even fear of disappearing. It was the fear of the moment the curtain drops and you realize you can't control anything. Fear of stepping into a room with no light switch. Some people fear dying. I feared the second after. The blank. The "and then what?" That question followed me for decades, like a shadow that didn't match my shape. And I didn't talk about it. Not really. Because at a certain age, people expect you to have made peace. They assume you have some wise, calm acceptance tucked neatly into your cardigan pocket. They don't want to hear that you still wake up sometimes with your heart galloping, thinking about the fact that you could be gone before morning. So I did what many women do. I stayed busy. I became an expert in distraction. I folded laundry with purpose. I volunteered. I cleaned kitchen counters that were already clean. I managed everyone's birthdays and appointments and crises like a one-woman control tower. If I kept the world in motion, maybe it wouldn't stop long enough to swallow me. And then, because life has a particular sense of humor, it was on one of the most ordinary nights of my entire life that the ground fell away. It was a Thursday in late November, the kind of cold that makes you grateful for radiator heat and wool socks. The sun went down early and stayed gone, and the house felt like a little island of light floating in darkness. I remember the small details because I've replayed them in my mind so many times that they've become engraved. I remember the sound of the dishwasher humming in the kitchen. I remember the smell of lemon dish soap on my hands. I remember the way my living room lamp cast a warm pool of light on the rug and left the corners of the room in shadow. I remember that I was watching a documentary I wasn't even interested in, just letting voices fill the air so the silence wouldn't. My phone was on the coffee table. My glasses were perched on my nose. My feet were tucked under a blanket. Everything was normal in the way normal feels when you're not paying attention. Then I felt a strange pressure, like someone had pressed a thumb into the base of my throat. Not choking, more like a heaviness behind the sternum, a dull insistence. I sat up, thinking maybe it was heartburn. I'd had spicy soup earlier. I'd been careless with pepper flakes like I was still 30. I took a breath to test it. The breath didn't go all the way in. It stopped halfway, as if my lungs were suddenly smaller than they'd been a minute ago. I remember thinking, very calmly, "That's odd." Then the calm broke. Because my left hand, my hand that had held babies and written grocery lists and brushed my daughter's hair, started to tingle. Pins and needles. Numbness creeping from fingertips to palm. I flexed my fingers. They obeyed, but sluggishly, like they were underwater. My mind tried to stay rational. I told myself it was circulation. I'd been sitting too long. Then my vision shimmered, just for a second, as if someone had wiped a greasy thumb across the air. The documentary voice on the television became distant, muffled, like it was coming from another apartment. I stood up too quickly. The room tilted. My stomach dropped not from nausea, but from something older and sharper. The body's ancient alarm. This is not normal. I reached for the arm of the sofa to steady myself. My hand touched fabric. I could feel it. But the sensation was slightly delayed, like my nerves were sending messages through a slow internet connection. And then, the most terrifying thing. My tongue felt thick. I tried to say my own name out loud just to prove I could. Margaret, I attempted. What came out was a soft, slurred sound. Not a word. A blur. My heart slammed into my ribs so hard it felt like it might break bone. My mind snapped to one word, bright as a neon sign. Stroke. I had heard the symptoms. I had read the pamphlets. I had repeated the acronym to my own mother when she got older. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call 911. Time. I turned toward the hallway where my phone charger was, because in my panic I forgot my phone was right there on the table. My feet moved, but my left leg dragged slightly, as if the floor had turned sticky. I reached the hallway wall and pressed my palm against it for balance. I opened my mouth to shout for my neighbor. I lived alone, but my walls were thin. If I yelled, someone might hear, but my voice wouldn't form. Air came out. Sound didn't. It was like being trapped behind glass. I pushed forward anyway, stubbornness rising in me the way it always had. I was the kind of woman who finished tasks even when tired. I was the kind of woman who dragged herself through grief and still showed up for other people. I wasn't going to die on my own hallway floor like an abandoned coat. I took one more step. My knee buckled. The world lurched. I remember the edge of the hallway runner rug rushing up to meet my face. I remember the cold, shocking sting of hardwood against my cheek. And I remember thinking one last clear thought, sharp as a tack. So this is how it happens. Then something shifted. Not gradually, not dreamlike. Like a switch flipping, the pain disappeared. The fear didn't vanish immediately, but it detached like it had been unhooked from my chest and left behind. I was still aware, more aware, in fact, hyper-aware. I could see the weave of the rug fibers. I could see dust under the baseboard. I could hear the dishwasher in the kitchen. I could hear the documentary voice still talking about something irrelevant and far away. And I could also see myself. This is the part where people roll their eyes. I know, I would have, once. But I'm not describing a metaphor. I was looking at my body on the floor, as if it belonged to someone else. My gray sweater bunched awkwardly under my shoulder. My hair, always slightly frizzy in winter, was splayed on the hardwood. One earring had slipped loose, hanging by the back clasp. My mouth was half open. My eyes were not fully closed. I remember being struck by how vulnerable I looked, how small, how human. And I remember feeling something I did not expect. Tenderness. Not horror, not disgust. Tenderness. The way you look at a child who fell asleep in an odd place. I tried to move, to get back into my body, because that's what made sense. I tried to scream, to make my throat work, but it wasn't panic now. It was curiosity, because while I was looking at myself, the space around me changed. The hallway didn't disappear, but it became less important, like scenery behind a stage. What became important was a sensation of widening, as if I had been living inside a narrow box my whole life, and suddenly the walls were gone. There was a presence, not a figure, not a face, a presence that felt like warmth and intelligence combined. If you've ever walked into a room and felt immediately that someone was there even before you saw them, like the air carried their signature. It was like that, but infinitely stronger. I knew, without knowing how, that I was not alone. And then I felt it. Light. Not light as in illumination. Light as in substance. It wasn't coming from a bulb. It wasn't shining on things. It was coming through everything, including me. It didn't hurt my eyes. I didn't even know if I had eyes in that moment. It was more like being filled from the inside by something that made darkness impossible. And with that light came an emotion so pure, I almost couldn't recognize it. Love. Not sentimental love. Not I love you love. A vast, unconditional, wordless love that didn't ask what I'd done with my life. It didn't weigh me. It didn't judge me. It knew me completely. Every regret, every secret, every thought I'd been ashamed of, every quiet kindness nobody saw, every moment I'd been cruel in my mind, even if my mouth stayed polite. All of it was visible, and yet I was held, not rejected. If you've spent any part of your life trying to earn love, you understand what that does to you. It breaks you open. I felt myself soften. The fear that had haunted me for years was suddenly ridiculous, like being afraid of water while standing in the ocean and realizing the ocean has been holding you your whole life. A thought clear, not in words exactly, but in meaning arrived inside me. You are safe, and I was. Then the hallway and the house and my body became even less important, like I was turning away from them without actually turning. There was a pull, not forceful, not urgent, but certain, like gravity, except made of peace. I drifted. I didn't walk. I didn't fly. I drifted the way a leaf drifts on calm water. The darkness around me was not black. It was velvety, soft, like the space behind closed eyelids when you're falling asleep. Then points of light appeared, not stars, not distant, but near, like lanterns in a fog. And I knew they weren't objects. They were awarenesses, presences. As I moved closer, the lights became familiar. That's the only word. Familiar. Like hearing a song you haven't heard in decades and suddenly remembering the entire chorus. One light approached me, and I felt a jolt not of fear, but of recognition so intense it was almost painful. My mother. My mother died when I was 42. Breast cancer that spread too fast. A hospital room full of flowers that wilted before she did. Me holding her hand, promising I'd be okay. Lying through my teeth because I couldn't imagine being okay. And there she was. Not with a hospital smell. Not with thin hair and skin stretched tight. Not with the tired eyes she had at the end. She was her. The essence of her. The way she felt in my childhood when I ran into her arms and buried my face in her sweater. I didn't see her face the way you see a face in daylight, but I knew her more deeply than sight. And when she came close, I felt what can only be described as an embrace without arms. A wrapping, a warmth around my awareness, and with it came a message. Oh, honey. That was it. 2 words. But they carried everything she ever meant. I wanted to speak. I wanted to apologize for all the times I was impatient with her when she was sick. I wanted to tell her I missed her. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. But words were unnecessary. She knew. I knew. All the things we thought we needed to say in life were already understood. Another presence came, and I recognized it too. My brother, David. He died young, 27, car accident on a rainy night. He'd been driving home from a friend's house, radio on, seatbelt off, because he was careless the way young men are careless. I remember the phone call. I remember my mother's scream. I remember thinking the world had cracked. David was there as a bright, mischievous energy, the same too much life feeling he always had. And the first thing I felt from him was, of course, humor, like he was smiling. And in that moment, something in me that had been clenched for decades loosened because the grief I carried was rooted in one assumption that he was gone into nothing. And he wasn't. He was alive in a different way. Then there were others, people I had loved and lost. My grandmother, an old friend, even a neighbor from my childhood who used to give me candy on Halloween and died when I was 10, someone I hadn't thought of in years until that instant. It was like the universe was saying, "See, you're not alone. You never were." I felt overwhelmed, not with sadness, but with a kind of awe that made me want to kneel, even though I didn't have knees. And then, gently, the light shifted again. The presences remained, but a deeper presence moved behind them, something vast, like the ocean beneath waves. This presence didn't feel like a person. It felt like origin. I hesitate to call it God, because people attach so many arguments to that word. But if you mean God as the source of love, the intelligence behind existence, the thing that makes life life, then yes, it was that. And when I became aware of it, I felt myself become transparent, not exposed in a shameful way, but seen in a way that made lying impossible. In that presence, my life opened, not like a slideshow, not like a movie, more like a living field of moments. I was inside my own memories, but also outside them. I felt what I had felt in each moment, but I also felt what others had felt because of me. This is the part people call a life review, and I used to think it sounded like a cheesy concept, invented by people who needed a moral. But it was real, and it was precise. I saw myself at 16, slamming a bedroom door in my mother's face, screaming that she didn't understand me. I felt my teenage rage, hot and righteous. Then I felt my mother's heart break, the way it landed in her chest, the way she stood in the hallway after I slammed the door and pressed her hand to her mouth so she wouldn't cry loud enough for me to hear. And I understood, fully, that she had been tired that day, that she'd been carrying her own fear, that she'd wanted to reach me, not control me. I saw myself at 35 in a grocery store parking lot, snapping at a cashier who was slow. I remembered being stressed, thinking my time was more important than hers. Then I felt the cashier's humiliation, how my tone made her feel small, how she went home and cried in her car for 5 minutes before starting the engine. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't a slap. It was understanding. Complete, inescapable understanding of how my actions rippled through other people. And then I saw moments of kindness I had forgotten. I saw myself at 50, stopping to sit with a woman on a park bench who looked lost. I remembered thinking it was nothing 5 minutes of conversation. Then I felt what she felt, relief so deep it almost made her collapse, because she'd been planning to go home and hurt herself, and my simple attention had interrupted the spiral. I sobbed, not with tears, but with something like release, because I had never known that my small act mattered. And the presence behind everything seemed to say, without words, this is what life is: connection, impact, love, withheld or given. I wanted to hide from some moments, not because I was being condemned, but because I was ashamed of my selfishness, my laziness, my petty resentments. But the presence held me steady, like a hand on my back. No judgment, only truth. Then something else happened. I was shown, not forced, just shown 2 possible paths. In one, I continued drifting deeper into that light, into a peace so complete it felt like the end of all searching. In the other, I went back to the hallway floor, back to the numb hand, back to the clumsy tongue, back to a world where grief exists. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I understood what people mean by choice. Not a dramatic, cinematic choice. A quiet, profound decision. Do you stay or do you return? I'll be honest. My first feeling was, I want to stay. Because the love there was more real than anything I'd ever touched on earth. It felt like home in a way I didn't know I'd been homesick for. And then a different image rose. Not from the presence, maybe from me. My daughter, Claire. She was 40 now, with her own life, her own worries, her own children. But in that moment, she was still my baby. Still the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and press her cold feet against my legs. I saw her face as she would look if she got a phone call saying her mother had died alone in the hallway. I felt the shock that would punch the air out of her lungs. I felt the guilt she would carry. Why didn't I call her more? Why didn't I visit last weekend? And I felt something else. The chain of fear that could pass from my death to her life. The way a sudden loss can make people hard, can make them guarded, can make them live smaller out of terror. I didn't want that for her. I didn't want my exit to wound her into a different person. So I did the only thing that made sense. I asked again, not with words, but with intention, "Can I go back?" And the answer came instantly, like the universe had been waiting for that. Yes, but with it came another feeling gentle and firm. Remember. Not remember the lights. Not remember the tunnel. Not remember the spectacle. Not remember the spectacle. Remember the truth. And then I felt the pull reverse. The light thinned, as if I was moving out of warm water and into cold air. The presences faded, not gone, just farther, like family waving from a porch as you drive away. I felt a sudden heaviness, gravity returning. And then, like slamming into a locked door, I was back. Pain exploded in my shoulder and cheek. My throat burned. My heart raced like a trapped animal. I heard a sound my own, horrible and wet, that I realized was a gasp. Air filled my lungs like it was the first breath I'd ever taken. I tried to move my left arm. It twitched. I tried to speak. A croak came out. I lay there, stunned, while the fear rushed back, in fear of dying, fear of being stuck, fear of not being found. But something in me was different. A calm center had formed, like a seed of that light planted deep inside. I dragged my right hand across the floor until my fingers touched the leg of the coffee table. My phone was on it. I could see it now, inches away, mocking me. I clawed at the table leg, pulled myself forward like an injured animal, and managed to knock the phone off the table. It hit the floor with a crack. The screen lit up. Thank God for that. My hand fumbled, but muscle memory saved me. I hit the emergency button, something I'd set up after my mother died, because I'd been afraid. Funny how fear can make you prepare for the moment it finally comes. The operator's voice came through. 911. What's your emergency? I tried to speak. My tongue still refused full cooperation, but I made sounds. I think I said my address. I think I said stroke. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The operator kept me talking, which is a strange thing being told to keep talking when you can't control your mouth. Minutes later, maybe 10, maybe 20. Time bends in emergencies. I heard pounding on my door, voices, my neighbor, Frank, shouting my name, then paramedics, bright lights, cold hands, a blood pressure cuff squeezing too tight. Someone's calm voice saying, "Ma'am, stay with me. Look at me. You're doing great." I remember being lifted onto a stretcher and wheeled into the night. I remember the sky above me, winter black, with one bright star visible between bare tree branches. And I remember thinking, with a clarity that made me dizzy, I just left. And I came back. In the hospital, there were scans, tests, a flurry of medical language. I'd had a transient ischemic attack, what people call a mini-stroke, plus a rhythm issue, with my heart they'd been missing for years. Lucky, the doctor said. Like luck had anything to do with the way my soul had been held. I spent days in a hospital bed, my left hand still weak, my speech improving, my body exhausted. But my mind was on something else. That place, that love, that truth. When Claire arrived, eyes wide, face pale, trying to be calm but failing, I held her hand with my right hand, and I did something I had not done often enough in my life. I told the truth. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, words finally forming. "I scared you." She squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I thought I lost you," she said. I swallowed. My throat was dry. "I need you to know something," I said, voice shaking, not from fear now, but from the weight of what I was about to say. "If I ever go, it's not nothing. It's not dark. It's safe." She stared at me like I was delirious. I could have stopped there. I could have protected myself from her skepticism, but I didn't want to go back to living small. So I told her, slowly, in pieces, what happened. Her face changed as I spoke, not to belief, exactly, but to listening. When I finished, she didn't laugh. She didn't argue. She just said, quietly, "Mom, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And it was the first time in a long time I meant it, because even though my body was weak, my fear, the deep, gnawing fear that used to wake me at night, was gone. Not reduced, not managed, gone. In the weeks after I came home, my world looked the same but felt different. My kitchen was still my kitchen. My hallway was still my hallway. The rug still had the same fibers. The baseboard still had dust, if you looked too closely. But I walked through my days like someone who had been given secret knowledge. The first morning I woke up in my own bed, sunlight on my face. I lay there and just breathed. Breathing had become holy, not because I was being spiritual, but because I realized how easily it can be taken away. I made coffee and watched steam rise from the mug as if I'd never noticed steam before. I listened to birds outside my window and thought, this is all so fragile and so beautiful. Then I started changing. Not in some dramatic, Instagram-worthy way. In practical ways, I stopped saving the good plates for guests. I used them on Tuesday nights because why was I treating my own life like a rehearsal? I stopped postponing apologies. If something sat heavy in my chest, I dealt with it. I called people I hadn't called in years, not to reopen old wounds, but to say simple truths. "I was thinking of you. I hope you're okay. I'm sorry for my part." Some conversations went well, some didn't. Not everyone wants a reopened door, but I wasn't doing it to be liked. I was doing it because I had learned something in that light. Unspoken love becomes regret, and regret is heavy. The biggest change was this. I stopped pretending I had endless time. Time isn't a vault, it's a stream, and you can't dam it with busyness. You can only step into it. At first, people around me didn't notice, or they assumed I'd had a wake-up call. Then they started noticing my calm. I used to be the woman who stressed over everything, who worried if the laundry wasn't folded, who replayed conversations in her head, who lay awake thinking of worst-case scenarios. Now, when something went wrong, I paused. Not because I didn't care, because I had perspective. One afternoon, a friend called me in tears because her husband had been diagnosed with cancer. She was panicking, spiraling, asking, "How do we do this? What if he dies?" I listened, and I felt the urge to say the thing I now knew. But I also knew that truth has to be offered gently. So I said, "I can't make this less scary, but I can stay with you in it. You're not alone." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and cried, not from fear of death, but from compassion, because I remembered how terrified I had been and how unnecessary that terror now seemed. I wanted to shake the world and say, stop being afraid, stop thinking it's nothing, stop thinking you're alone. But you can't force someone into peace. You can only live in a way that invites it. Over the months, I tried to make sense of what happened without turning into a caricature of myself. I didn't suddenly join a cult. I didn't start wearing crystals. I didn't stop believing in medicine. If anything, I respected it more because it brought me back. I went to follow-up appointments. I took blood thinners. I changed my diet. I walked every day because my body deserved care. But inside, something had shifted from fear to awe. And that awe made me kinder. Not syrupy, not fake. Kinder in the way that matters. Patience, attention, forgiveness. I had less interest in being right and more interest in being at peace. Then, about 6 months after the incident, something happened that tested my new calm. Claire's son, my grandson, Noah, had an accident on the playground. He fell and hit his head badly. There was blood. There were screams. He was rushed to the ER. I remember sitting in the waiting room, fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of disinfectant too strong, Claire pacing like a caged animal. Every old fear in me tried to rise. What if he dies? What if this is the moment everything breaks? But then I felt that seed of calm inside. I took Claire's shaking hands in mine and looked her in the eyes. Listen, I told her. Right now, he is alive. Right now, he is here. Stay here with him in this moment. Don't leave the room in your mind. She sobbed. I can't. Yes, you can, I said, firmer than I meant to. Because you have to. Because fear will steal this moment from you, even if he's okay. Don't let it. Don't let it. I didn't tell her my secret then. I didn't say, even if the worst happens, it's safe. She wasn't ready for that sentence. It would have sounded like betrayal. So I gave her something human. Presence. Noah was okay, thank God. A concussion, stitches, a terrified little face that melted into sleep once pain meds kicked in. When we got home, Claire hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, I don't know how you stayed so calm. I almost told her everything again, but instead, I said, I've learned something. I'm still learning it, but I'm trying to live it. She nodded, and for the first time, I saw something shift in her too, not belief, but curiosity. That's how it spreads. Not by preaching, by being different. There were still nights when I woke up, of course. I'm human. I'm 65, not enlightened. But when I woke up, my heart no longer galloped in terror about death. I would wake up, listen to the quiet, and think, if I died tonight, I would be held. That thought didn't make me reckless. It made me grateful. It made me softer. It made me stop wasting time on grudges that had been eating my life like termites. One day, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I hadn't been in years. I used to avoid it because it made the finality feel real. But now, the finality didn't scare me. I walked among the stones, the cold air stinging my cheeks, and I found her name. I stood there and felt something so strange. Not grief, exactly. More like closeness. Hi, Mom, I said out loud. A man walking his dog looked at me and then looked away politely. I didn't care. I closed my eyes and tried to reach for that feeling I'd had in the light. And I felt it, faintly warmth, not in my hands or face, but in my chest, a gentle pressure that felt like a response. I whispered, I'm okay. And I realized that was what she would have wanted all along. Not my suffering, not my endless mourning, just my living. When I got back in my car, I sat for a while and thought about all the years I'd wasted being afraid of what might come after, when the real tragedy would have been never really living before. That's the cruel trick fear plays. It convinces you it's protecting you, but it's actually stealing you. A few weeks after that, I started telling my story to people not strangers on the internet, not to everyone, but to those who needed it. One was a woman from my church, Linda, who was terrified after her husband died suddenly. She couldn't sleep. She was convinced he was gone into nothing. She sat at my kitchen table, twisting a tissue in her hands, and she said, Margaret, I don't know how to be okay. I poured tea. I watched steam rise. I took a breath. Then I said, Linda, I don't tell this to everyone because I know how it sounds, but something happened to me, and I told her. When I finished, her eyes were wet but softer. Do you really believe it? She asked. I shook my head. It's not belief. It's knowing. Or maybe it's the closest I can come to knowing with a human brain. She leaned forward. Was it beautiful? I hesitated because beauty is too small a word. But it's the word we have. Yes, I said. It was safe, and it was love. Linda put her hand over her mouth and started crying, not the panicked crying of terror, but the open crying of release. Thank you, she whispered, as if I'd handed her water in a desert. I didn't fix her grief. Grief doesn't get fixed. But I saw her shoulders drop. I saw her breathe deeper. And I thought, this is why I came back. Not to become special, but to offer peace. Another time, my neighbor Frank, who had found me that night, sat on my porch and admitted something he'd never admitted to anyone. He was terrified of dying. He'd pretend he wasn't, but he was. He stared out at the street and said, I've had nightmares since I was a kid. Always the same. I'm falling into a black hole. I looked at him and felt compassion. I used to have that fear too, I said. I don't anymore. He laughed nervously. How? And I told him. He didn't know what to do with it at first. He made jokes. He changed the subject. Men sometimes do that when something is too tender. But then, after a long silence, he said quietly, If that's true, that changes everything. I nodded. It does. And I meant it. Because when you're not afraid of death, you stop living like you're constantly running from something. You start living like you're moving toward something. Not the afterlife, toward love, toward truth, toward presence. Here's the paradox. The less I feared death, the more I loved life. I loved the taste of an apple. I loved my grandson's laugh. I loved rain on the roof. I loved the feel of clean sheets. I loved the way my daughter's voice changed when she was trying not to cry. I started noticing miracles that I used to call ordinary. And I stopped postponing joy like it was a luxury. One night, almost a year after the incident, I had a dream, or something like a dream. I was in my hallway again, seeing my body on the floor. But this time, the fear didn't come. Instead, I felt that presence again, the ocean beneath waves, and I heard, not in words, but in meaning, you remembered. I woke up with my heart calm and my eyes wet. And I realized that maybe the purpose of that experience wasn't to give me a story. Maybe it was to give me a way of being. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, but what if it was just your brain? What if it was chemicals? What if it was a hallucination? Listen, maybe it was. I'm not a scientist. I'm not here to argue with anyone's research. But here's what I can tell you with absolute honesty. Whatever it was, it cured a fear that therapy, religion, logic, and time couldn't touch. It changed me in measurable ways. It made me kinder. It made me braver in life. It made me stop wasting time. It made me choose love more often. If a hallucination can do that, then maybe we should ask why our brains are wired to produce something so healing at the edge of death. Or maybe, just maybe, our brains aren't producing it. Maybe they're receiving it. I don't know. But I know the outcome. And the outcome is this. I'm not afraid anymore. Not of the darkness. Not of being alone. Not of the, and then what? Because if I learned anything on that night, it's this. We are held. Even when we think we're falling, we are connected. Even when we feel isolated. And love is not a reward at the end of a good life. Love is the fabric of reality. I'm 65. My hands have spots now. My knees ache when it rains. I forget names sometimes. and then remember them in the shower for no reason. I am not pretending I'm immortal. I know I will die. But I don't think of death as a thief anymore. I think of it as a threshold. And because of that, I'm trying every day to live in a way that makes crossing that threshold simpler. Not perfect, just honest. So if you're listening to this and you're afraid, if you're lying awake at night feeling that cold question in your chest, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me earlier. You don't have to carry that fear alone. Talk to someone. Say it out loud. Don't let it rot in silence. Fear grows in the dark. And also, this matters, don't wait for a crisis to start living. Don't wait until you're on a hallway floor to say the thing you should have said. Don't wait until you're in a hospital bed to decide what matters. Pick one thing today. 1. Call someone you love. Forgive someone you've been carrying like a stone. Write the letter. Take the walk. Eat the good meal on a random Tuesday. Look at the sky like you're seeing it for the first time, because you are. And if you ever find yourself at the edge, in that moment you think you're alone, remember what I learned. You are not. I don't say that as a slogan. I say it as a woman who left and came back, and who now, finally, can sit in the quiet of her house at night and feel something she never felt before. Peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances. The kind that doesn't demand proof. The kind that feels like being held. That is why I'm not afraid of death anymore. And that is why tomorrow morning I'll wake up, if I'm given the gift of waking up, and I'll make coffee and watch the steam rise and whisper, not to the universe, but to life itself. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.